What is a creep? It's the most popular term right now for anything or anybody who's making people, namely women, feel uncomfortable, unsafe, or even physically violated. Creepers, sex pests, creepy men are the ones to watch out for. And being thought of as a creep is probably one of the modern man's greatest fears.
Now, of course, you just see a tall creep peering in at you as you're trying to exit the building.
I know I desperately don't want to be called a creep. And that label of creep, rightfully so, has shifted the way a lot of guys act in social and romantic situations. And that's a good thing. I am glad that the lasting effects of the Me Too movement are resulting in a change of behavior. My question now, though, is how do I make sure I'm not a creep? You know, those guys who are subjects of whisper networks.
What a creep. What a creep.
Clearly, creepiness is subjective. I mean, it's a gut instinct. It's a vibe. So the only way to figure out how to not be a creep is to figure out what are the traits of a creep, some actual examples of creepiness to give some context, and then some ideas on how to not be that. Now, I've seen definitions of creep ranging from guys who women find unattractive all the way over to rapists. But I think the majority of what women think is creepy is somewhere in the middle. The most succinct definition of a creep that I've found is a man or woman who breaks social rules in an odd or obsessive way and doesn't really listen to no or behavioral cues. Usually these folks are perceived as undesirable, notably insistent, or somewhat pathetic. So why are men creeps? There are different levels of creepiness. Weird creepy, relentless or too sexual too soon creepy, stalker creepy, and then physical threat level creepy. This is the spectrum. The only level that's really tricky or even allowed socially is the weird one, because one woman's weird is another woman's wonderful. We contain multitudes. But what makes for weirdness in romantic situations? What fills that uncanny creep valley? To me, it happens when men are not direct about their intentions. It's unnerving when a guy beats around the bush. Women sense something is afoot when men aren't saying what they mean. But you have to say what your intent is with an awareness of the situation, the location, and the information the other person's giving you. You can't just be direct and not care. If they look annoyed, back off. And maybe see it just as another shot took. You have to be direct with respect. Now, let's look at why men behave in the other three levels of creepiness: relentless, stalker, and physical threat. Now, I don't believe in labeling men as insatiable animals. I don't. The root reason is usually that the guy can only feel worthwhile or empowered if he's fulfilling the traditional male role of sexual Lothario, proving to themselves and their peers that they are worthy of love from that community. Or sometimes the guy craves intimacy and, on a deeper level, love, and thinks the only way to feel that way is through sex, and so they get desperate. They stare, they stalk, and sometimes they get grabby and creepy. And nobody's really helping these guys figure out another way. And they should know better, of course. It should be the most obvious thing in the world to respect when someone says no, or leave me alone, or just doesn't seem interested. But today, when you have role models like Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, or online dating coaches, men seem to think that they can take what they deserve and can fill their desperation for love and connection with persistence and steadfast resolve, not take a no for an answer. In these instances, the label of creep might be the only way a woman can really defend herself outside of trying to be, talking to the police, which statistically doesn't always go so great. Actually, less than 40% of stalking victims report incidents to law enforcement. Victims of stalking have to prove their fear in a court of law, and they have to prove that their stalker knew that the stalker behavior was unwanted. Now, to really bring the definition of creep into focus in a kind of memorable way, I recently held an online poll to ask women, what are things guys do that make them creeps? The responses were sometimes surprising, sometimes, very reasonable, and sometimes things that I have definitely done in my life. Here are a few of the most applicable to this conversation. If you address a woman as love when you don't really know who they are, you're a stranger. If you're trying to talk to a woman when they have headphones in, just don't do that. If you tell a woman that the girls you're attracted to all have the same body as them, that's just gross. If you get too sexual, too early, saying something like, yeah, girls have complained about giving head because I'm too big, just don't do that.
I really want to stick my penis in your vagina. Yes, nice, Jimmy, very nice.
What? I'm not doing that!
But the talent show is tomorrow night.
Creep!
Now, there's so many different ways to define creep. I also asked women if they tend to find men less creepy who have some of these behaviors if they were attracted to them. 30 women voted. 53% said yes, they would be less creeped out if they were attracted to them. And it does seem like attraction plays a bit, or at least a tiny part, in not feeling creeped out. I mean, it's one of those things where I do think that if a woman found a guy attractive and not attractive, and they both said the same thing to them, they might still like the attractive guy. Now, the thing is, these behaviors seem to cover the full gamut of interactions in a way. If all this is creepy, then how can men ever talk to women without being deemed a threat? This is where social cues, experience, and the courage to fail comes in. Basically the hard part. When I asked the test group of women if a guy shooting his shot or trying to pick up a woman is inherently creepy, they were mostly empathetic, as long as the guy was able to take no for an answer.
Even if I were blind, desperate, starved and begging for it on a desert island, you'd be the last thing I'd ever
A big piece of notable creepiness is also defined by what happens after a potential creepy encounter. A guy could take the hint and leave a woman alone when she said no, that's not creepy. Or he could retaliate in the moment, blame her for acting like she was asking for attention in some way, or even worse, he might do some verbal or physical abuse. That's creepy, that's bad, don't do that. A friend of mine recently told me a story about a male coworker who vandalized her car in the night because she turned him down. Now, that's not the most violent thing you could do, but it's still traumatic, it's still jarring. Women are kind of putting their bodies on the line here. Many of us know the percentages of spousal harm and spousal murder are high, most times as the result of a refusal of sex. So there's real danger out there. I think my friend MC Hentz put it so vividly when she said, women don't have a space where they're not being assessed for sexual value. It's exhausting. If you see someone and you're drawn to them, it's okay to write your number down, go up and say, don't want to bother you. I'd love to buy you coffee sometime. Here's my number. Have a wonderful day. Conversations with men need to stop feeling like a transaction. Now, that insight might feel surprising to some men. I mean, most of us have been raised in a society, in a patriarchy, that teaches us that we need to dominate, and women like it. We're here to take. We're here to notch our belt with sexual experiences in order to be worth something to our male community. That's how we get empowered. Trevor Noah recently pointed out that men are human beings who crave intimacy just like anybody else, but the only way they know how to gain intimacy is through sex. So it's the feeling and experience that they chase constantly.
People don't realize how often men are experiencing a lack of intimacy. And the only place that they can experience that intimacy is through sex.
Okay, so what isn't creepy? Well, it's not creepy when men have self-value placed outside of how much sex they have. Basically, finding a hobby, getting a life. It's not creepy to look at women as people, not as objects for the taking. Women can tell when you're hyper-focused on getting sex. It sucks to be alone, and I get that, but women want a partner, not an owner or someone they have to serve. It's not creepy when you accept rejection with grace, as my friend Evan Watkins said on my podcast.
If you come at it with good intentions and you're like a young guy and you see somebody and they're like, oh, I think they might like me. And if your intention is like, I want to make a connection with you, even though I'm super horny and I can't control my hormones, if you keep that in check and you respect them and listen to them, you should be okay.
Yeah.
You know what's more sexy than being a jerk and being impatient? Is being patient and being totally fine.
I also think about how much alcohol might come into play with creepy behavior. Blackout drunkenness is many times the precursor to bad decisions. I mean, there is a line between fun/loose and then completely unfettered/myopic, okay? Just keep that in mind when partying and maybe you'll be less creepy. And lastly, it's not creepy to be direct with respect. If you're interested in someone, let them know in a respectful and empathetic way for the situation you're in. And if your gesture isn't reciprocated, exit swiftly with grace and humility. If you take rejection as just a part of your long romantic story, you'll feel better in general and you won't be seen as a creepy guy. Men, it is time we all admit that we were raised being instructed by invisible forces, rules and socializing tips that conditioned us to think of women as objects created for our sexual gratification. But it's also time that we admit that these forces are not outside our control. I mean, it's hard for me. I work on it every day. I try to recognize that the thought patterns that are not helpful to me are not helpful to women either. You are not your thoughts. You are not your behaviors. You are that consciousness that sits behind your thoughts. And if women in society are telling you that your current perspectives or behavior are harmful to them, then listen, figure out why, and continue trying to do better. Not just for them, but for yourself. Because I don't want any of you to be creeps, and I don't think you do either.